Yo, my heart is torn between two ways of telling you about the contents of a book and maybe making you want to open it. I originally wanted a beautiful woman's chest, framed like this, to read select excerpts, then have my drunk brother-in-law react. Well, react to the excerpts, not to the pair of, please. A vertical format, social media, to tuck a little culture beneath an Instagram-style veneer of superficiality. And I wanted to call it 1S3G Instagram. 1S3G Instagram. It's good, right? No, she was joking with me. But for YouTube, in my opinion, it needed a more in-depth format. More complete. So I chose to do both, with edited clips of what's coming soon on social media, assembled and completed by yours truly. And as the first book, I chose Propaganda by Bernays.
It's difficult to fully grasp the social, political, and economic transformations of the last century if you know nothing about Bernays and what he accomplished.
Go on, I'm interested.
Bernays is generally recognized as one of the main creators, if not the main creator, of the public relations industry, and so, as the father of what Americans call spin. That is, the manipulation of news, media, and public opinion, as well as the systematic and large-scale practice of interpreting and presenting facts in a biased way. No, but are you listening to me?
No, but I'm stuck on the cover of the book. Basically, it's about propaganda, a little manual to explain how he manipulates public opinion.
We can gauge the influence of Bernays' followers by recalling the striking remark of Alex Carré, suggesting that three phenomena of considerable political importance defined the 20th century. He said the first is advancing democracy, mainly by expanding voting rights and developing trade unions. The second is the increase in corporate power. And the third is the massive deployment of propaganda by corporations in order to keep their power safe from democracy.
So democracy is exclusively for the people.
There's a bit of that. Among other things, we learned that politically propaganda was not born, as commonly believed in totalitarian regions, but actually right at the heart of American liberal democracy.
This first excerpt is from Norman Baillargeon's preface and is notable because the book was written a century ago. We now have much more perspective on the actions that Bernays was only just beginning to undertake at the time.
The conscious, intelligent manipulation of the organized opinions and habits of the masses plays an important role in a democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen social mechanism form an invisible government that truly rules the country.
Whoa, that sounds a bit conspiratorial.
We are, for the most part, governed by men we know nothing about, who shape our minds, mold our tastes, and suggest our ideas. That's a logical result of how a democratic society is organized. This form of cooperation among the greatest number is a necessity for us to be able to live together within a well-functioning society. Most often, our invisible leaders do not know the identity of the other members of the inner cabinet to which they belong.
Like the Kukulisko.
They govern us by virtue of their natural authority, their ability to formulate the ideas we need, and the position they hold in the social structure.
No, my name isn't Dennis. Also, how would you even recognize me? What? By my interjections?
It doesn't matter how we each react to this situation, more than in everyday life, whether we think about politics or business, our social behavior or our moral values. In fact, we are dominated by that relatively small number of people who are able to understand the mental processes and social patterns of the masses.
Basically, for him, not everyone is capable of leading the herd. And in any case, shepherds are needed. So there's no master.
They are the ones pulling the strings. They control public opinion, exploit the old existing social forces, invent other ways to connect the world and guide it.
But that means they're responsible for the world we live in. And on the other hand, when a company goes wrong, the leader gets fired. So, at what point can we say that the world as a company is going wrong? You have to understand that the term invisible government is metaphorical. It's not an established structure. It only serves to group together all the influential people who might not even know each other, but who manipulate the largest number of people through their influence. And that's in every field. Oh, there are definitely some secret societies in the mix. You can't fool me. Bernays, throughout his book, legitimizes this control as well as his profession. Propagandist, also called a public relations advisor. No kidding. Who would write a book to say what they do is shit? Except for Bruno Le Maire. Oh, you're here too? I don't have anything better to do, and I don't like drinking alone. But I'm not drinking now. You're drinking alone. Beyond legitimacy for Bernays, there's a kind of inevitability. In a democracy, you couldn't reasonably do otherwise. This invisible structure, which inextricably links group and association, is the mechanism that democracy has found to organize its group mind and simplify its collective thinking. To lament the existence of this mechanism is to wish for a society that has never existed and never will. Admitting that it exists but hoping it remains unused is just as unreasonable. And this control of public opinion is omnipresent. If there are only a few political parties and carefully chosen candidates for elections, it's not for nothing. Their number would adapt to the electoral system to steer public opinion toward the collective interest. Theoretically, everyone forms their own opinion on public issues and on those that concern private life. In practice, if all citizens had to study for themselves all the abstract information of an economic, political, and moral nature involved in even the smallest subject, they would quickly realize that it is impossible for them to reach any conclusions at all. So we will voluntarily agree to let an invisible government sift through the information, highlight the main issue, and narrow down the choices to realistic proposals. Who is we? We accept that our leaders and the media outlets they use to reach the general public will point out to us the so-called matters of public interest. We accept that a moral guide, like a pastor for example, or an essayist, or simply a widespread opinion prescribes for us a standardized code of social conduct, which most of the time we follow. Our acceptance is ultimately our inaction in the face of what is set up before us. Silence gives consent, sometimes before we end up feeling stupid. Maybe it would be better to replace propaganda and self-serving advocacy with committees of wise men who would choose our leaders, dictate our public and private behavior, decide what clothes we should wear and what food we should eat, because they know what's best for us. However, we have chosen the opposite method, that of open competition. So it's up to us to make sure this model works more or less well. That's why society agrees to let the ruling class and propaganda take care of organizing free competition. For Bernays, a well-functioning democracy cannot exist without leaders resorting to propaganda.
The minority has discovered that it can influence the majority in its own interests. It is now possible to mold the opinion of the masses to convince them to use their newly acquired power in the desired direction. Given the current structure of society, this practice is unavoidable.
Oh well, there's no choice. We have to be manipulated and influenced. Otherwise, what happens? We end up with nothing left on our plates?
From the moment propaganda necessarily intervenes in everything that has some importance on a social level, whether it's in politics or finance, industry, agriculture, charity, or education. Propaganda is the executive organ of the invisible government.
I didn't offer. Do you want a plate? I'll take one.
Generalized education was supposed to allow the common man to control his environment. Based on this, and thus more democratic, once he learned to read and write, he would have the intellect to guide himself.
Well, that's not why we go to school. They lied to us.
Instead of intellectual abilities, education gave him rubber stamps, inky pads with advertising slogans, editorials, scientific information, all the trivialities of the popular press and the attitudes of history, but not a trace of an original thought.
So school education is a scam. Wait until I send a letter to the Ministry of Education.
These stamps are reproduced in millions of copies, and all it takes is to expose them to identical stimuli for them to be imprinted in exactly the same way. The mechanism that allows large-scale dissemination of ideas has a name: propaganda, which in a broad sense is any organized effort to spread a particular belief or doctrine.
Well, they're not going to be happy. And here my angry stamp. I'm putting it all over the letter. For Edward Bernays, even though the word propaganda has an unpleasant connotation, it is a completely legitimate form of human activity. Modern propaganda refers to a consistent and sustained effort to provoke or influence events with the goal of shaping the public's relationship with a business, an idea, or a group. This practice of determining circumstances and simultaneously creating images in the minds of millions of people is actually very complex. Is it good or bad? He believes it depends on the cause's merit and the accuracy of the published information. The truth is compelling and must prevail. If a group of men believes they have discovered a valuable truth, it is their duty, even more than a privilege, to spread it. But then, right after that, he tells us about the Imperial Wizard, the leader of the Ku Klux Klan, who, through heavy propaganda, even manages to influence the election of a governor. This clearly shows that from the moment anyone has enough influence, they can bring a whole section of the population along with them, at least for a while and for a specific purpose. He discusses propaganda's major usefulness in the last war, which he sees as minor compared to its future impact. But he never questions propagandists' actions, viewing them as entirely beneficial. Sure, because these men follow a code of honor. The profession has also developed for its own use a moral code that rivals those governing the practices of legal and medical professionals. This code is partly imposed on it by the very conditions of its work. If, like lawyers, the public relations advisor acknowledges that everyone has the right to present their case in the most favorable light, nevertheless, he will refuse to offer his services to a client he considers dishonest, to a product he finds fraudulent, or to a cause he deems antisocial. And yet everyone knows the most famous campaign of Edward Bernays when he managed to put cigarettes in the hands of the suffragettes. Equating freedom, emancipation through the right to vote, and the right to poison oneself like men and become dependent on the tobacco industry. Even today, the success of this campaign is not on everyone's lips, but almost, and you can smell it on the breath of quite a few young ladies. In court, both the judge and jury share decision-making power. In front of public opinion, the public relations advisor plays both roles simultaneously as he gives both his opinion and his verdict in his argument. With so much power, it's a good thing that this profession is made up of completely honest people. Sincerity must be a golden rule for them. It must be repeated that his activity is not meant to deceive the public or mislead them. A public relations advisor who gained such a reputation would be finished, professionally speaking. The future will prove him wrong. Fortunately for him, in fact.
A systematic study of crowd psychology has revealed the potential that manipulating the motives guiding human action in a group represents for the invisible government. Trotter and Lebon, who first approached the subject from a scientific perspective, followed by Graham Wallace, Wendell Littman, and others who continued research on collective mentality, demonstrated on the one hand that a group does not have the same psychological characteristics as an individual, and on the other hand, that it is motivated by impulses and emotions that cannot be explained by knowledge of individual psychology. Naturally, the next question is, if we manage to understand the mechanisms and drivers of collective mentality, couldn't we control the masses and mobilize them at will, without them realizing it?
Go ahead, keep going, I'm hanging on your every word.
Propaganda has recently shown it's possible, at least somewhat, and among certain elites. Of course, collective psychology is still far from being an exact science, and the mysteries of human motivation have not all been revealed. That being said, the distinction between theory and practice turns out to be subtle enough that there is no longer any doubt that, in certain cases, the implementation of a particular mechanism does indeed cause a change in opinion that remarkably matches what was expected. A bit like a driver adjusting the speed of her car by controlling the flow of fuel.
Don't your hair bother you a little bit there? Doesn't it tickle you?
Propaganda is no more an exact science than economics or sociology, because all three have the same subject of study, the human being. From the moment you can influence the leaders, whether they are aware of it or not, whether they agree to cooperate or not, you automatically influence the group they have under their control.
I'm completely under their control right now. Bernays points out that the group doesn't need to be physically gathered or even defined to be influenced. A man alone behind his desk, keeping within himself all the images previously imprinted on his mind. Their work led Trotter and Le Bon to the conclusion that thought, in the strict sense of the word, had no place in the collective mentality, which is guided by impulse, habit, or emotion. When it comes time to choose, his first instinct is usually to follow the example of a leader who has managed to earn his trust. This is one of the most firmly established principles in the psychology of crowds. Although the world has changed a lot, propaganda still takes the same path today. If in the past, for example, it was enough to convince a famous ballroom dancer to wear a particular piece of jewelry for 90% of American women to want one, today nothing stops us from buying people who are able to spread that desire. Influencers, both women and men, but that's a whole lot of people. And no, even if thousands of influencers spread the propaganda, they themselves are influenced by a minority among them. They are well paid off by just a few propagandists. The propaganda isn't even hiding anymore. You really have to be pretty dumb to let yourself be manipulated by someone who spells it out right in their job title. Maybe. Someone's knocking at the door. Hello, Emmanuel serial killer. Come on in. But you have to be careful not to think that propaganda only exists where you can see it. When the crowd can't model its behavior on that of a leader and has to decide on its own, it does so using cliches, slogans, or images that symbolize a whole set of ideas or experiences. A few years ago, simply labeling a political candidate with the word interest made millions instinctively refuse to vote for them, as it was strongly linked to corruption. Recently, Bolshevik was used to scare the public and push them away from certain actions. And if they weren't Bolsheviks, was it still the same? Today, the terms would be more like far right or far left. Nazi, racist, conspiracy theorist, anti-vax, pro-Russian, Islamist. Propagandists sometimes manage to stir up a whole mass of collective emotions by playing on an old cliché or by creating a new one. More broadly, when all the media start using the same terms to denigrate or, on the contrary, to glorify someone like Macron in 2017, there's something fishy going on. And unfortunately, there are far too few people to spot propaganda in it.
People rarely become aware of the real reasons behind their actions. Mr. Everyman believes he made an informed decision when buying his car after carefully comparing the technical features of the different models available on the market. Kinzeler said it may seem we're at risk of a mistake.
There are studies that have shown that drivers often share psychological characteristics when they drive the same style of car. Personally, I drive a wreck. I wonder what that means.
Sometimes we desire something, not because it is intrinsically valuable or useful, but because unconsciously, we see it as a symbol of something else that we don't dare admit we want.
That's right, Bernays. He's Freud's nephew. You can kind of tell.
This great principle that our actions are largely determined by motives we hide applies just as much to collective psychology as it does to individual psychology. The propagandist who wants to succeed must therefore understand these hidden motives, without being satisfied with the reasons people give to justify their behavior. In this regard, simply understanding social mechanics, group dynamics, divisions, and allegiances is not sufficient. An engineer might know all about cylinders, pistons, and locomotives, but without understanding how steam reacts to pressure, he can't make them move. The steam that drives the social machine is human desires. Only by striving to understand them will the propagandist be able to control this vast mechanism. To the poorly fitted pieces that make up modern society.
Woo, modern society. And make two clever, poorly fitted pieces. That's how you end up with a poorly fitted idea. Man. Before Bernays, the propagandist stuck to a very simple doctrine. A stimulus often repeated ends up creating a habit. An idea often reiterated becomes a conviction. The strategy was all about hammering the message, and it still works. That's also because the world is changing. Carglass repairs, Carglass replaces. He's crazy, Aflalou. He's crazy. Decathlon, all about fitness. Mercurochrome, the bandage for heroes. Shampoo. Without alcohol, the party is even crazier. Awaken the lion within you. What else? After Bernays, the propagandist will ask himself, who are those who, by their position, influence our habits the most? Pasta, yes, but Panzani, everyone stands up for Danette. Pierre Martinet, the uncompromising caterer. Kiri, the cheese for little gourmet kids. Ya bon banania, the best of the best is Plantafin. Actimel strengthens your natural defenses. Today, because he understands the structure of society and the principles of collective psychology, the sales manager will first ask himself, who are the people who, by their position, influence our eating habits? The answer is obvious. Doctors. This new type of salesman will then suggest that the medical community publicly speak out about the beneficial effects of eating bacon. He knows with mathematical certainty, because he understands the psychological dependence of patients on their doctors, that most people follow the opinions of the medical profession. There's a reason we often see doctors on our news channels. Always the same ones, because they still have to agree to spread state propaganda. Like those TV doctors who came to tell us that drinking your coffee while sitting could help you avoid COVID. I guess they thought the virus circulated at a height of 1.5 meters. We can clearly see with the bacon example that the truth he wants to spread through propaganda mainly serves the interests of a client. And as a side note, Bernays is the father of the hearty breakfast, with bacon of course. The modern propagandist will therefore set out to create the circumstances that can change this trend. A few years after writing the book, Edouard Bernays worked for an American aluminum company. Which produced toxic waste containing fluoride that poisoned the water next to their factories. With the support of doctors, he managed to convince the authorities and the public that adding fluoride to the water in small amounts is beneficial for dental health. even if it causes side effects and public health issues, such as when there's too much near their factories. Who would have thought that not drinking a drop of tap water could be good for your health? In short, Bernays works hard to make people believe in the benefits of a product. He's no longer trying to sell it, but to get the public to seek the product out themselves, by making them believe that this product represents health, freedom, or social progress.
The ties between the business world and public opinion began to tighten more than 10 years ago. Nowadays, companies treat the general public as partners.
For him, 10 years ago means the 1920s. For us, that's a long time ago.
Longtemps.
Companies have indeed realized that their relationship with the general public, far from being limited to manufacturing and selling specific products, requires them to sell themselves, along with everything they represent in people's minds.
That's where greenwashing comes from. Polluting is frowned upon, so we pollute with the green logo.
20 or 25 years ago, they ran their business without worrying about public opinion. After a period of scandal at the management level, those who found themselves in the hot seat were accused of countless sins they hadn't always committed.
They clearly didn't learn their lesson, as scandals continue.
Faced with widespread alienation, major companies had to stop insisting their business was solely their own concern. If today, they and others tried to silence public opinion, the reaction we saw 20 years ago would happen again, and the public would rise up against the company to try to strangle it with restrictive laws. The business community is well aware of the public's growing awareness, and this situation encourages healthy cooperation.
Healthy cooperation through propaganda, mind you.
The strengthening of ties is also undeniably explained by the various phenomena brought about by mass production. This is only profitable as long as it maintains its pace, in other words, as long as it continues to sell what it produces in a constant or increasing quantity. As a result, unlike what happened a century ago, when demand created supply through the artisanal methods of a production system organized in terms of units, nowadays, it is supply that tries to create demand to match itself. An industrialist who is potentially able to supply a specific product to an entire continent cannot afford to wait for the customer. Through advertising and propaganda, he strives to stay in constant contact with the general public in order to create a continuous demand, without which his expensive factory would not generate any profit.
Much has changed in a century, with information spreading much faster.
But in the end,
not that much. To counter the increasing ease with which people can gather, propaganda has become more sophisticated and is always one step ahead.
Giving the governor a taste for governing, that is the major political problem faced by modern democracy.
Oh sure, as if we should also make them want to live like kings on our dime.
The voice of the people is only the expression of the popular spirit, itself shaped for the people by the leaders they trust, and by those who know how to manipulate public opinion. An inheritance of prejudices, symbols and clichés, to which are added a few phrases instilled by the leaders. Fortunately, propaganda offers skillful and sincere politicians a valuable tool to shape and mold the will of the people.
To skillful and sincere politicians? So, do the others not have the right to use propaganda? Fortunately.
A machine can't spark the public's interest. A leader, a fighter, a dictator, yes. However, given our current political situation, where anyone aspiring to an official position must please the masses to win their votes, a natural-born leader has no other way to assert themselves than by skillfully using propaganda.
The force of the dictator is replaced by the propaganda of the democratic leader.
The field of candidates is like the secret of a chemist capable of transforming a prosaic platform into a winning order of votes.
For some reason, it reminds me of Macron. It must be one of his bedside books. Maybe it's the bedside book of those who foisted him on us.
Whoever this man may be, and for whatever reason he fires up the country's imagination, he is still less important than the party, whose stated goals are simple.
Go tell Macron that he was less important than his party, En Marche, to which he gave his initials. What an ego.
A well-designed campaign should highlight not the candidate's personality, but their ability to carry out the party's program and the human content of that program.
Macron likely didn't finish the book, since there was no actual party or program behind it. It's funny.
Our democracy is being called upon to show the way. It must be led by the intelligent minority who knows how to marshal the masses in order to guide them better.
Oh yeah, basically this book serves as a justification for all the idiots who are full of themselves. You're super smart, so it's up to you to lead a bunch of idiots. Whatever you do will be better than anyone else, because you're smart. So it's up to you to lead a bunch of idiots. Is it about ruling through propaganda? Let's say, if you prefer, that it's about ruling through education. However, in this area, education in the theoretical sense is not enough. It needs to be backed by skillful propaganda, which alone can shape circumstances to meet needs, highlight the key points of significant events, and orchestrate the presentation of major issues. The statesmen of tomorrow will then be able to focus the public's attention on crucial political issues, and from there, mobilize the vast and diverse masses of voters in favor d'une action intelligente et réfléchie. But the statesman must also be intelligent and thoughtful. He gave us all the keys in his book to understand that through propaganda, the invisible government shapes which leaders get chosen, often serving companies that want to shield themselves from democracy. Are Macron, Trump, Zelensky, and Netanyahu all working for the common good with humanistic propaganda? And Bernays knows that even the education that allows us to judge all this contains the very virus it is supposed to fight. Considered from an ethical perspective, propaganda has the same relationship with education as it does with business or politics. It can, it's true, be misused, used to flatter the reputation of an institution and give it an artificial value in the eyes of the public. Nothing guarantees that it won't be used abusively. To drive the point home with the Godwin's Law reference, do you know who was one of its most fervent admirers? Joseph Goebbels, the Minister of Propaganda and Public Enlightenment under Hitler. He made full use of Edward Bernays' methods, especially on the radio and in the cinema. In our contemporary world, cinema is unknowingly the most effective vehicle for propaganda. Nothing else spreads ideas and opinions like it. Cinema has the power to standardize the thoughts and lifestyles of the entire nation. However, for Bernays, the more the general public becomes aware of the methods used to shape their opinions and behaviors, the more they will only be receptive to reasonable messages that align with their interests. I'm not sure everyone likes that idea myself. No, but the so-called informed citizens and consumers are still a minority even today. Just like those who have read this book, which took almost 80 years to be translated into French, by the way. Propaganda will never cease to exist. Intelligent minds must understand that it offers them the modern tool they need to seize for productive purposes, to create order out of chaos. Bernays reveals to us here, ultimately, the paradox that governed his life. At the same time, he proclaimed his concern for truth and free discussion. And to accept that the truth will be stated by a client at the beginning of a campaign, which must use every possible means, including the truth itself if necessary, to win support for a thesis, or encourage certain behaviors among people who are assumed in advance to be incapable of truly understanding what is at stake, and to whom one therefore feels entitled to serve what Plato called noble lies. Well, I hope you enjoyed it. Maybe it was a bit long. I need to find the right timing to tell you enough so that either it's enough for you or you decide to learn more by opening the book. And not, like here, maybe go a bit too far and lose some people. In any case, as usual, thanks to those who watched until the end, those who like, those who share, and of course to those who donate. See you very soon.